There is a man standing at the edge of a great city, watching it burn with light. The city is Ur. The year is somewhere around 2100 BC, give or take a generation. And Ur is not some forgotten desert village. It is one of the most advanced cities on earth, a place of running water and multi-story houses and ziggurats so tall their tops vanish into the haze of the Euphrates plain. The priests here are astronomers. The merchants here are wealthy. The streets here are paved. And this man, this 75-year-old man with a wife and a household and a life that works, hears a voice. The voice says, "Go." That's it. No map, no destination address, no estimated arrival time. Just go. Leave your country, leave your people, leave your father's household. Go to a land I will show you. His name is Abram. We will call him Abraham because that is who he becomes. And what he does next is so strange, so unreasonable, so borderline irrational, that the ancient Jewish text Pirkei Avot, written centuries later, will say that God tested Abraham 10 times, and he passed every single one. 10 tests. A whole life mapped out in trials, each one more costly than the last. Here is what nobody tells you about those 10 tests. They are not just Abraham's story. They are yours. Every test Abraham faced is a test you will face, or already have. The shape of the trial changes. The century changes. The geography changes. But the soul of each test? It is the same. And if you understand what God was doing in Abraham's life, you will understand what God is doing in yours. So let's walk the map. All 10 stops. And I promise you, by the time we reach the last one, you will never read the story of Abraham the same way again. We start in Ur. Test number 1. The call comes with no explanation and no guarantee. God does not tell Abraham what the land looks like. He does not tell him how far it is. He does not tell him whether the people there will be friendly or hostile, whether the soil will grow crops, whether there will be water. He says go, and he says it to a man who is 75 years old. Think about that for a moment. You are not 22. You are not starting out with nothing to lose and nowhere to be. You are 75. You have built something. You have furniture. You have relationships. You have a routine that works. And God asks you to walk away from every single piece of it, in the direction of a place He has not yet named. That is test 1, and it is the test most believers face first. Maybe for you it was a job you had to leave before the next one was confirmed. Maybe it was a relationship you knew you had to end even though you had no idea what came after. Maybe it was a city, a plan, a version of your future that you had already mapped in your head. And God said, not yet. Not that. Come this way. The call with no address. That is where the map begins. Abraham goes. He packs everything. He takes Sarah his wife, and Lot his nephew, and all the possessions they had accumulated, and the people they had acquired in Haran, and he walks. The writer of Hebrews will say it 4,000 years later, by faith. Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he was to receive as an inheritance. And he went out, not knowing where he was going. Not knowing. That phrase should ring a bell for you. Because you have been there. You have taken a step that cost you something real, in a direction that wasn't fully clear. Because something inside you, something you could not quite name, told you that you had to move. That is test 1. Abraham passes it. And then, almost immediately, test 2 arrives. He arrives in Canaan. God appears to him and says, "To your offspring I will give this land." And Abraham builds an altar. He worships. He keeps moving. He is in the land. He is exactly where God told him to go. And then the famine hits. Now there was a famine in the land. 5 words, and they change everything. Abraham has just obeyed the most costly command of his life. He has left his home, his city, his comfort, his past. He has arrived, and the land God promised him, the land God said he would give to his offspring, is starving. This is the test that follows test 1. Almost always. You obey. You step out. You sacrifice the old life and move toward the new thing God has called you into. And then, right then, in the early days when you are most vulnerable and most hopeful, something goes wrong. The relationship hits turbulence. The new job gets harder than you expected. The church you joined starts to fracture. The ministry you launched doesn't grow. And the question underneath all of it is the same question Abraham is facing in Canaan. Did I hear right? Did I actually hear God? Or did I just make a decision and call it a calling? Here's what most people miss about test 2. The famine is not God's punishment. It is God's pressure. There is a difference. Punishment says, you went the wrong way. Pressure says, let's see if you'll trust me when the environment stops cooperating. Abraham goes down to Egypt. He leaves the promised land because the promised land is not delivering on its promise yet. And you cannot blame him. A famine is a famine. But the fact that he goes to Egypt, the fact that he looks south toward comfort and provision instead of pressing deeper into the difficult land, sets up test 3. Egypt is not the promised land. Abraham knows this, but Egypt has food, and Canaan does not. And sometimes the most spiritual sounding answer and the most practical answer are pulling in opposite directions, and you have to choose. He chooses Egypt, and the moment he crosses into Egypt, fear takes over. Sarah is beautiful. Abraham has known this for decades. But in Canaan, beauty was just beauty. In Egypt, beauty is a liability. Egyptian nobles will see her. They will want her, and if they know she is his wife, they will kill him to take her. So Abraham does something that will embarrass theologians for centuries. He tells Sarah to say she is his sister. She is, technically, his half-sister, so it is not a full lie. But it is not the truth either. And what it is, really, is fear. Abraham, the man who walked away from Ur on a word from God, who crossed the Euphrates with no map, who built altars in a strange land, is now so afraid of Pharaoh that he hides behind his wife. Pharaoh's officials see Sarah. They report her beauty to Pharaoh. She is taken into his palace. And Abraham, the man God called to be the father of nations, says nothing. Does nothing. Accepts gifts, sheep and cattle and donkeys and servants. And lets it happen. This is test 3. And Abraham fails it. Let that sit for a moment. Because we are only 3 tests into a 10-test map. And the man we are following, the man held up in Hebrews chapter 11 as the great hero of faith, has already failed the test. He lied. He was passive when he should have been brave. He traded his wife's safety for his own survival. And here is the extraordinary thing. God does not walk away. God sends plagues on Pharaoh's household. Great plagues. The text says, and Pharaoh, confused, afflicted, searching for the source, eventually figures it out. He calls Abraham in. He confronts him. He says, what have you done to me? Why did you not tell me she was your wife? Pharaoh, the most powerful man in the ancient world, is more honest in this moment than Abraham. And yet, God rescued Sarah. God protected the promise even when the promise holder panicked. God did not disqualify Abraham because Abraham failed test 3. He sent plagues. He worked around Abraham's failure. He brought Sarah back. Stay with me, because this is one of the most important things the map of Abraham's life will show you. Your failures do not cancel God's purpose. They complicate it, they slow it, they create consequences you will have to live with. But they do not end the story. Because the story is not, ultimately, about how faithful you are. It is about how faithful God is. Pharaoh sends them away. They go back to Canaan. Back to the land. Back to the altar Abraham had built. And the text says Abraham called on the name of the Lord there. He returned. He worshipped. He did not stay in his failure. Test 4 comes quickly. And it reveals a side of Abraham almost nobody preaches about. War breaks out across the region. 4 kings against 5. The Dead Sea Valley becomes a battlefield. And Lot, Abraham's nephew, who had separated from him earlier to live near the cities of the plain, gets caught in the middle. Sodom falls. Lot is captured, taken north as a prisoner of war. A survivor escapes and finds Abraham. And what does Abraham do? He arms 318 trained men from his own household. He divides his forces. He pursues the 4 kings all the way to Dan, hundreds of miles north. He attacks at night. He routs them. He chases them beyond Damascus. He brings back all the goods. All the people, Lot included. Abraham is a soldier, a strategist, a commander. This is not the Abraham of Sunday school flannel graphs. The Hebrew word used here for his trained men is hanekev, from a root meaning dedicated or initiated. These are not mercenaries. These are men Abraham has personally trained, personally invested in. He has been building this small army for years without knowing why he would need it. God was preparing Abraham for a test Abraham didn't know was coming. And when Abraham returns from battle, a mysterious figure comes out to meet him. A king named Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of God Most High. He brings bread and wine. He blesses Abraham, and Abraham gives him a tenth of everything. This is the first tithe in the Bible, and it happens immediately after battle, before Abraham has rested, while the blood is still on his armor. Abraham does not wait until life is comfortable to honor God. He honors God first. Test 4 is the test of what you do with your strength. When you have won, when you have resources, when the moment of power arrives, do you give the first and best to God? Or do you wait and see what's left? Abraham passes test 4, and then comes the strangest test of all. Test 5 is not an action. It is a vision, a promise, a ceremony so odd, so ancient, so soaked in the customs of the ancient Near East, that most modern readers slide past it without understanding what is happening. God takes Abraham outside. He tells him to count the stars. He says, "So shall your offspring be." And Abraham believes God, and the text says God counted it to him as righteousness. But Abraham asks a question. How will I know that I will possess this land? It is a fair question. He has been waiting. He is older now, maybe 85. Sarah is still barren. The land is still full of other people. And so God says, "Bring me a heifer, a goat, a ram, a turtle dove, and a pigeon." Abraham brings the animals. He cuts them in half. He lays the pieces across from each other, making a path between them. This is an ancient covenant ceremony, called in Hebrew Berit Bin Habaturim, the covenant between the pieces. Two parties would walk between the cut animals together, both agreeing, "If either of us breaks this covenant, let what happened to these animals happen to me." Abraham prepares the pieces. He waits. He drives away the birds of prey that descend on the carcasses. The sun goes down. Terror and great darkness fall upon him. And then, God puts Abraham to sleep. And while Abraham sleeps, God walks between the pieces alone. A smoking fire pot and a flaming torch pass between the halves. God makes the covenant, but only God walks through. Abraham is unconscious. Abraham cannot participate. Abraham cannot break his end of the deal, because Abraham has no end of the deal. This is test 5, and it is perhaps the hardest test of all for people who like to be in control. God is saying, "This covenant does not depend on your faithfulness. It depends on mine. I am binding myself. I am taking on the consequence if this fails. You cannot earn this. You cannot maintain this. You cannot protect this by being good enough. All you can do is trust me." And somewhere in that darkness, with the stars above him and the sound of animals and the smell of smoke, Abraham sleeps and trusts, and it is counted to him as righteousness. But before we get to test 6, I need to plant something in your memory. It is a small detail, easy to miss, and we will come back to it near the end of this video. When God finally tells Abraham to take his son Isaac to Mount Moriah, when the final test comes, Genesis chapter 22 says something specific about the wood. It says Abraham rose early in the morning. He saddled his donkey. He took 2 of his young men with him, and his son Isaac, and he cut the wood for the burnt offering. He cut the wood himself, the night before. He laid it on Isaac's shoulders for the journey up the mountain. Hold that detail. We are not done with it yet. Test 6 is the test nobody wants to talk about, because it is too relatable, too human, too close. Abraham and Sarah have been waiting for a child for years, decades. Actually, God has promised. God has repeated the promise. And still, nothing. Sarah is past the age of childbearing. Abraham is past the age of hope. And so Sarah does something that makes complete sense and turns out to be completely wrong. She takes matters into her own hands. She has an Egyptian servant named Hagar. And she goes to Abraham and says, "The Lord has kept me from having children. Go to my servant. Perhaps I can build a family through her." This was not unusual in the ancient world. Surrogacy through a servant was a recognized legal custom in Mesopotamia, documented in the Nuzi tablets. Legal texts from the same era and region as Abraham's origins. Sarah is not doing something scandalous by the standards of her culture. She is doing something practical, rational, even generous, in a painful kind of way. And Abraham listens to her voice. 4 words in Hebrew. Vayishma Avram lakal Sarai. And Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. Those 4 words echo an earlier moment, when Adam listened to the voice of his wife and ate the fruit he should not have eaten. The text uses nearly identical language. The parallel is not accidental. The writer of Genesis is flagging something. When a man of faith listens to the voice of human urgency instead of waiting for the voice of God, things go wrong. Hagar conceives. And immediately, the household fractures. Hagar begins to look at Sarah with contempt. Sarah turns on Abraham. This is your fault. Abraham, caught between 2 women in pain, says, she is in your hands. Do with her as you see fit. Sarah treats Hagar harshly. Hagar runs. This is the mess that impatience makes. One decision, one moment of God is taking too long. Let me help, and suddenly there are 3 people in misery. A pregnancy that complicates everything. And a son who will spend his entire life defined by the circumstances of his birth. Ishmael is not a mistake. He is a person, a beloved person, a person God will see and bless and promise to make into a great nation. But he is not the child of the promise. And everyone involved will spend the rest of their lives navigating that painful distinction. Here's the part nobody tells you about test 6. The test is not whether you will sin spectacularly. The test is whether you will trust God's timing when his timing stops making sense. Abraham and Sarah had been waiting at least 10 years since the original call. Sarah was in her mid-80s. Every biological clock was not just ticking, it had wound down, stopped, and been buried. And they blinked. You've blinked too. Maybe not with the same consequences. But you have been in a season of waiting that stretched past what seemed reasonable. Past what seemed kind. Past what seemed possible. And you took matters into your own hands. You forced a door that wasn't opening. You manufactured an outcome because the real one was taking too long. And the results were complicated. Not catastrophic. Maybe. But complicated. Real consequences. On real people. That you are still navigating. Test 6 is the test of the waiting room. It is the question of whether you will stay in the waiting room long enough for God to do what only God can do. Abraham fails test 6, and moves on to test 7. Test 7 seems almost anticlimactic compared to what came before. God appears to Abraham when he is 99 years old. He re-establishes the covenant. He changes Abram's name to Abraham, father of many nations. From a man who still has no son by his wife. He changes Sarai's name to Sarah. And then he gives Abraham a sign of the covenant. Circumcision. Every male in his household. On that day, starting with Abraham himself, at 99 years old. Now, I want you to think about what this test is really asking. Circumcision in the ancient Near East was not a private medical procedure done in a clinical setting. It was visible. It was permanent. It was the kind of thing that changed how you moved through the world, how you bathed, how you interacted with other men in the communal spaces of the ancient world. It was a mark you could not hide and could not take back. God was asking Abraham to put his faith on his body, permanently, publicly, irreversibly. This is the test of public commitment. The test of whether your faith is just a private feeling in your chest, or whether it becomes something you carry on your person. Something other people can see. Something that costs you social comfort. Abraham passes test 7. That same day, the text says, he does not wait until morning. He does not consult anyone. That same day, he is circumcised, and his son Ishmael, and every man in his household. That same day is one of the most quietly remarkable phrases in Genesis. And then, almost immediately, Abraham fails again. Test 8 is almost identical to test 3. Same pattern. Different king. Abraham moves south into the region of the Negev. He settles in a place called Gerar, in the territory of a king named Abimelech. And Abraham tells the people there that Sarah is his sister. He has done this before. He got in serious trouble for it before. Sarah was taken into Pharaoh's palace before. God had to send plagues to rescue her before. And Abraham does it again. Abimelech takes Sarah, and this time, God appears to Abimelech in a dream, God himself, directly, in the night, and says, "You are a dead man because of the woman you have taken. She is a man's wife." Abimelech, who has not touched Sarah, is furious and confused and afraid. He returns Sarah to Abraham. He confronts Abraham, And he asks the same question Pharaoh asked decades earlier. What have you done to us? What was your reason for this? Abraham gives an answer that is part explanation, part excuse. I thought there was no fear of God in this place. And they would kill me because of my wife. He was afraid. Again, same fear, same lie, same failure. And yet, God restored Sarah. God protected the promise. God appeared in a dream to a pagan king to set things right. God worked around Abraham's repeated failure. Now watch what happens next. After this mess, after Abraham's same mistake in a new city, God does something remarkable. He tells Abraham to pray for Abimelech, for the man whose household Abraham's fear had endangered. And when Abraham prays, Abimelech is healed, his household is restored. God turns Abraham's failure into Abraham's ministry. The man who sinned against this household becomes the man who heals it. Not because Abraham deserved that role, but because God's purposes are not derailed by human weakness. They are, somehow, threaded through it. Test 8 teaches us something that Test 3 only hinted at. It is not just that God forgives repeated failure. It is that God is patient with patterns, with the sins you commit more than once, with the fear that surfaces again in a new city even though you thought you were past it. God does not disqualify you because you failed the same test twice. But there is a cost. And Test 9 is where Abraham will pay it. Test 9 does not look like a test at first. It looks like a domestic crisis, a family situation, a painful, private matter between a man and 2 women and 2 sons. But it is a test. Maybe the second hardest one Abraham will face. Isaac is born, the impossible child, the child of the promise, born to a 90-year-old woman and a 100-year-old man. And for a time, the household holds together, but at the feast to celebrate Isaac's weaning, when Isaac is maybe 2 or 3 years old, something happens. Sarah sees Ishmael, and she sees something in what Ishmael is doing, and she goes to Abraham with a demand that cuts him in two. Send away this slave woman and her son, because the slave's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac. The text says the matter was very distressing to Abraham on account of his son. Not on account of Hagar. On account of his son, Ishmael, the boy he has watched grow up, the boy he has loved for 14 years. The firstborn. Abraham loves Ishmael. This is not a man sending away a servant. This is a father being asked to send away his child. And God says, listen to Sarah's voice. We have heard those words before, but in reverse. Earlier God let Abraham listen to Sarah's voice when he shouldn't have. Now God tells Abraham to listen to Sarah's voice when every instinct in him is screaming against it. Because through Isaac, God says, your offspring will be named, but I will also make a nation of the son of the slave woman. Because he is your offspring. Abraham rises early in the morning. He takes bread and a skin of water. He sets it on Hagar's shoulder and sends her away with the child. He does not watch them go. As far as we know, the text doesn't say he embraced Ishmael. It doesn't say he wept. It just says he rose early and sent them away. Maybe the early rising was the only way he could do it, before the grief caught up with his body. Hagar wanders into the wilderness of Beersheba. The water runs out. She sets Ishmael under a bush. He is too weak to walk. She sits down a bowshot away. She does not want to watch her son die. And she weeps. And God hears the voice of the boy. And the angel of God calls to Hagar from heaven and says, what troubles you? Hagar, do not be afraid. God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. Lift up the boy and hold him fast with your hand, for I will make him into a great nation. Then God opens her eyes and she sees a well of water. And she goes and fills the skin and gives the boy a drink. Test 9 is the test of releasing what you love for a purpose you cannot fully see. Abraham does not get to know, in this moment, that Ishmael will be all right. He does not receive a vision of the well in the wilderness. He sends his son away on faith, on the word of God, on a promise that must have felt impossibly abstract in the face of his son's face. You have been in a version of this test too. Maybe not with a child, but with something, or someone, you loved deeply. Something you had to release because holding on was no longer the right thing. And the releasing was not clean. It was not ceremonial. It was an early morning, a skin of water, a long walk away. And the faith required was not the faith of sermons and worship nights. It was the quiet, grinding faith of doing the hard thing because God said so, even when your heart was breaking. Abraham passes test 9, and now there is only one test left. And it is the one that will define everything. Here's what most people miss about the Akedah, the binding of Isaac on Mount Moriah. Most people read it as a test of willingness. Was Abraham willing to give up his son? Yes. God was testing how far Abraham would go. He stopped it in time. The lesson: be willing to sacrifice what you love most. That reading is not wrong, but it is incomplete. Because the Akedah is not just a test of willingness. It is the culmination of everything that came before it. Every prior test was preparing Abraham for this moment. The first test taught him to move at God's word. The covenant tests taught him that God's promise does not depend on human faithfulness. The failure tests showed him that God's patience outlasts human weakness. The grief of test 9 taught him that releasing what he loved did not mean God abandoned what he released. All 10 tests, in sequence, were teaching Abraham one thing: not just that God is powerful, not just that God keeps promises, but that God can be trusted with the thing that costs most. Early in the morning, again, that same phrase. Abraham rises early. He saddles his donkey. He splits the wood for the burnt offering. He takes Isaac and 2 young men, and they set out for the place God had told him about. 3 days' journey, 3 days of walking towards something Abraham does not want to do, with his son walking beside him. On the 3rd day, Abraham sees the place from a distance. He tells the young men, "Stay here with the donkey. I and the boy will go over there and worship, and we will come back to you." We will come back, plural. The writer of Hebrews will explain this. Centuries later, he says Abraham reasoned that God could raise the dead, because in a sense, Abraham had already received Isaac back from the dead. Isaac was born from a body as good as dead. And Abraham believed, somehow, some way, that what God had started with Isaac, God would not end on a mountain. We will come back. Abraham takes the wood he cut himself the night before, and he lays it on Isaac's shoulders. Isaac carries the wood up the mountain. And as they walk together, Isaac asks the question that must have stopped Abraham's heart mid-stride. "Father, here is the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" "God will provide for himself the lamb," Abraham answers, and they walk on together. They reach the place. Abraham builds the altar. He arranges the wood. He binds Isaac and lays him on the altar on top of the wood. He stretches out his hand. He takes the knife. And the angel of the Lord calls to him from heaven. "Abraham, Abraham, here I am. Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." Abraham looks up. In the thicket there is a ram, caught by its horns. He takes the ram and offers it as a burnt offering instead of his son. Now, we come back to the wood. Remember the wood. Abraham cut it himself. He laid it on Isaac's shoulders. Isaac, the son, the beloved, the only one, carried the wood up the mountain for his own binding. The wood that was intended for him was the wood he carried on his back. Centuries later, another son, another beloved, another only one, another mountain, the same mountain range, the same ridge of Moriah, and another father laid wood on that son's shoulders for the journey. And that son carried it, up a hill, to a place of sacrifice. The wood Isaac carried was a shadow, a signal across 1,000 years of history, pointing forward to a morning when no angel would call out from heaven, when the knife would not stop, when God would provide the lamb, and the lamb would be his own son. Abraham named that place Yahweh-Yireh, the Lord will see, or, the Lord will provide. The Hebrew Yireh carries both meanings, to see and to provide, because in God's economy, to see a need and to meet it are the same act. Test 10 is not the end of the story. It is the meaning of the whole story. It is the answer to the question every other test was asking. Can you trust God with the thing that matters most? And Abraham's life, mapped across 10 tests, says, yes, slowly, painfully, with failures along the way, with repeated mistakes and grief and impatience and fear. But, yes. Josephus, the 1st-century Jewish historian, writes about the Akedah in his Antiquities of the Jews. And in his retelling, he describes Abraham explaining to Isaac what is about to happen. And Isaac, Josephus writes, received the news with a noble spirit. He said he would have been unworthy to be born to Abraham if he had not obeyed the will of God. Whether Josephus is filling in what Genesis leaves implicit or capturing the tradition passed down, what he sees in the story is something the text implies but does not state. This was not one unwilling man with a knife and one unwilling boy on an altar. This was two men, one old, one young, both surrendering, both trusting the same God, both walking up the same mountain, together. That is a picture of faith that no flannel graph can hold. And before we get to the 3 takeaways, if this kind of deep look at Scripture is what you want more of, click subscribe. We put out a new video every week, and the next one is going to be just as good as this one. Possibly better. Now, 3 takeaways, the ones the map of Abraham's life is meant to leave with you. Takeaway 1. The tests come in sequence, not by accident. Abraham's 10 tests are not random. They escalate, they deepen, they build on each other. Each one uses the muscle that the previous one developed. You could not put test 10 at the beginning of Abraham's life. He would not have had what it took. The years of smaller surrenders, the early morning obediences, the covenant ceremonies, the griefs, the failures and recoveries, were the training that made Moriah possible. Your trials are not random either. The test you are in right now is not an accident or a punishment or a cosmic mistake. It is the next stage of a process that has been going on since the first time you said yes to God. You are being built for something, and the thing you are being built for requires the exact thing this trial is developing in you. That does not make the trial easier, but it makes it meaningful, and meaning changes everything. Takeaway 2. Your failures are not disqualifications. Abraham failed test 3. He failed test 6. He failed test 8. He failed the same test twice. With different kings. He lied to protect himself. He was passive when he should have been brave. He tried to help God with a plan that created generational pain. And he is still called the father of faith. Not because God graded on a curve. Not because the failures didn't matter. They did matter. There were real consequences. Real people were hurt. Real pain was created. But God's faithfulness to Abraham was never based on Abraham's faithfulness to God. It was based on God's own character, God's own promise, God's own decision to walk between those pieces alone. If you are in a season of recovery, if you are somewhere after a failure you cannot stop replaying, hear this. You are not disqualified. The map is not over. God has not crossed you off. He walked between the pieces alone. And that means the covenant does not depend on you being perfect. It depends on Him being faithful. He is faithful. Takeaway 3. The wood you carry becomes the witness. Isaac carried wood up a mountain to a place of sacrifice, and did not know, fully, what the wood was for. He trusted his father. He kept walking, and when the sacrifice was redirected to a ram in a thicket, that wood became the altar on which the alternative was offered. You are carrying something right now. Maybe it is grief. Maybe it is a diagnosis. Maybe it is a relationship fracturing in slow motion. Maybe it is a calling that is costing more than you thought it would when you said yes. You are carrying wood up a mountain and you do not yet know what it is for. But this is what the map of Abraham's life tells us. The wood you carry does not go to waste. It becomes the altar. It becomes the witness. It becomes the story you tell someone else in 10 years. Or 20. Or 40. The story that begins with, I did not understand why I was carrying this. And then I saw. Yahweh Yireh, the Lord will see, the Lord will provide. On this mountain, it shall be provided. If you are on the mountain right now, if you are on the 3rd day of a journey you did not choose, carrying wood you do not understand, then this is for you. He sees you. He will provide. He has always provided. And the wood you are carrying is not the end of the story. It never was. If this video meant something to you, share it with someone who needs it today. Not tomorrow. Today. And if you want to go deeper into stories like this, the ones the Bible tells that change how you see your own life, subscribe and come back next week. We will be here.